I found that guys who are afraid of being cheated on 100% of the time get cheated on. Do they pick cheaters because that fits their worldview? Not only does our trust issues tend to bring out the worst in people, we will tend to co-create the world as we believe it to be based on what's underneath our trust issues from childhood. All right, well, let's talk about trust. Originally, the aspirations of integrated man had 16 aspirations, and that's not a magic number. When I first started working on that list, it probably had about 40 different ideas that I honed down to about 16, and decided when we wrapped up with 16, there was a couple more that I wanted to add. And one of them was on trust. And where that really came up, maybe about a month ago on the online forum, the timeline, a discussion started about trust. And one of the guys was going through a separation, I think with his girlfriend. And he felt somewhat betrayed by some of her actions. And he brought up, can you really trust anybody? And so a really, really good discussion got going of how do you know who you can trust? A lot of men expressed a fear of being betrayed by a woman. And how do we begin trusting a person? One person said, well, doesn't trust have to be earned? Like we all know what that means, right? How do you earn trust? I'm actually not sure about that. Somebody else asked if trust was like a leap of faith. And somebody even said, well, I used to think that maybe the only person you could trust 100% is yourself. And he wasn't even so sure about that. And what really is, I read all of these posts and I interjected a few pieces. What really struck me is that pretty much, I'd say maybe all of the posts about trust completely lacked nuance, context, intuition, being in the moment, being conscious. It was all kind of like blanket statements about trust, who you trust, who you can't trust, how people have to earn trust. And I thought, really, that doesn't serve us very well. And I tried to communicate that a little bit on the forum, but I thought me posting a few messages won't do it justice. So I thought, well, we'll do a lesson on it. We'll add it to the aspirations. So last week I talked about part one. And really what we covered was talking about that discussion on the forum, asking a few questions, who and what can be trusted? Is anyone or anything 100% trustworthy? Can we trust ourselves? How do we become aware of our projections that we project onto people based on our own past wounds and betrayals and abandonments? And if trust is lost in a relationship, can it be recovered? Can we get it back? Can they get it back? So last week, I shared three things that I observed about people and trust. And this includes me. Okay. One is that how we trust is pretty much, maybe 100% of the time, a projection of our childhood wounds. Whatever we experienced as a child in terms of just being able to trust our caregivers when we were dependent and needy and really immature and underdeveloped, that got recorded into our emotional nervous system. And that's what we bring to all of our current relationships with people, with situations, at work, in the world. And if our trust was often betrayed, most people go one of two ways as children. One is we don't trust anybody. And it makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, our parents, promise us something, don't follow through. Mom, in my family, my dad was angry all the time. And so every emotion I ever interpreted was trust. My mother was codependent, so she was smiling all the time. So I couldn't trust what she really felt. Culture even encourages parents to lie to their kids. Well, they're too young to understand. Lie to them. And I'm thinking, well, kids get punished for lying to their parents, but parents lie to their kids all the time. So as children, we lose the ability to intuitively trust. As I'm going to talk about in this lesson, I think we're actually born. We're equipped with an intuitive sense of what's trustworthy and what's not. But that kind of gets conditioned out of us. So what we typically do is we go one way or the other. We trust everybody, even when we shouldn't, or we don't trust anybody, even when we should. I mentioned on the call last week that my wife and I kind of have this ongoing thing that if we're driving in the car and somebody pulls in front of us or is distracted or does something stupid, turns left from the far right lane, which is actually kind of common here in Mexico. My sense always is, well, they're just unconscious. They're not paying attention. They're not in the moment. My wife's read on that is they're fucking assholes. That's if people do things that upset her, they're fucking assholes. I go, nah. So I quit trying to have the discussion that maybe they're just unconscious and not aware. And the funny thing is, I'm learning from her. There are fucking assholes out there. You shouldn't trust them. And I think she's learning from me. Some people are just unconscious. That doesn't mean they're not completely trustworthy. So most of us go one way or the other, right? I'm going to trust everybody regardless of context. I'm not going to trust anybody regardless of context. Now, the second point I made is that how we trust is almost completely out of conscious awareness. You know, as I asked people on a poll on the timeline last week, you know, about their trust issues, it really got even clearer to me. We think we understand how we trust. Well, I trust and verify. Well, I trust, they have to earn my trust. I think the truth is deeper that we either fucking don't trust people at all or we trust people way too much. And we pretend that somehow we're actually consciously making decisions about people's trustworthiness. I think we're fooling ourselves. I think it's pretty much an unconscious shadow process of how we go about trusting or not trusting. And then the third point that I made is that how we trust is often fundamentally dysfunctional and typically invites the very things we fear the most. Now, I'll give an example. We're going to co-create familiar situations. If we're not trusting of people, we're going to invite untrustworthy people. If we trust everybody, well, we're going to get hurt. I mean, people are going to use us and abuse us and hurt us. But one thing that I found, if guys come to work with me and they basically say, yeah, I'm afraid that women are going to cheat on me. You know what? Every single man who's ever told me that in a group or in therapy that they're afraid they're going to get cheated on perpetually gets cheated on. Do they pick cheaters because that fits their worldview? Or does their belief they're going to get cheated on mean they put up so many walls, they're so distrusting, they drive their partner away to where somebody comes along, is nice to them, pays attention to them, and of course, they go with that other person. I found that guys who are afraid of being cheated on 100% of the time get cheated on. Now, that's just one example. I'm sure that manifests in so many different ways. So not only does our trust issues tend to bring out the worst in people, we will tend to co-create the world as we believe it to be based on what's underneath our trust issues from childhood. So how do we learn to trust? How do we find out who is trustworthy and who's not? And how do we get close to the right people and keep the wrong people away from us? How do we overcome our childhood conditioning and learn to trust based on our perception of the present moment, not on a generalized projection that we've been carrying since childhood? So some of the questions I want to try to answer on this particular lesson. So I want to look at three things about trust. And I've been working on this lesson for 2.5 weeks now. And it's really been a powerful lesson for me to even show me how I don't trust very effectively. And this may sound a little bit complicated at first, but I'll try to make it not so. But three things I want to talk about. Number one, trust is multifaceted. It's not black and white. It's not either or. Trust is fluid. You might be surprised to find out that there's people in your life that you can trust certain things about them, but maybe you shouldn't trust other things about them, which actually, if you know that, that actually makes them more trustworthy. If you know where people are not trustworthy, you can actually trust them to be consistently not trustworthy. Think about that for a moment. And the third thing that I want to talk about, and this is really maybe the core of what the lesson is going to be about, is that trust is inherently an intuitive process. Because, I mean, there's a lot of people out there trying to pull something over on us. There's a lot of people out there that aren't trying to pull anything over on us, but in any given moment, what they're projecting or what they're saying or what they're promising or what we expect of them maybe is not particularly trustworthy. How do we know that? So trust is intuitive. Okay, let's talk about that first one. Trust is multifaceted. Now, there's so many aspects to trust. Really trying to do this in 2 lessons really doesn't do it justice. But if you think about it, I'm going to guess that everybody is fundamentally trustworthy in some ways. And everybody is fundamentally untrustworthy in other ways. So I think there are probably, if we can know a person's nature, know their agenda, pay attention to our intuition, I think there's people that we can trust 100% in certain situations, and people we should never trust under, and it could be the same person, never trust in different circumstances. That's why I say it's multifaceted and what we're going to have to call on our intuition. So we have to learn which is which. I was talking with Coach Sid about this lesson on trust a couple of weeks ago, and he gave me an example, told me a story. He said he was a school teacher. He said he used to do this thing with his classroom. He had a jar and a bunch of marbles, and they called that the trust jar. And he would explain to the students, I don't recall what age he taught, but he'd explain to the students that trust was this two-way street between him and the class members. And there were certain things expected of him. And when he met the expectations, marbles went in the trust jar. And when the class members, they had certain expectations of class members. And when they met those expectations, marbles went in the trust jar. And the more marbles that went in the jar, the more, I think, maybe special privileges or activities or fun things the kids in the class got to do. When he or they did not perform up to their expectations or commitments, marbles went out of the jar. And then some of the privileges and fun stuff was taken away. And I said, I really like that illustration because whether we realize it or not, every relationship, whether it's a brand new relationship or one we've had for years, has a trust jar. And as we start seeing how each person interacts, if they meet certain expectations, if they keep their word, if they're dependable, we add marbles to that jar. But here's what I told Sid. There's actually several trust jars in every relationship. And each trust jar over time kind of reaches a certain level and probably stays pretty static. Now, some jars may be higher than others, just maybe because I know a person better in some ways than I know them in others. And so there's going to be multiple jars. Now, we don't actually probably ever get conscious of all these different jars, how many marbles are in them. But what happens if one of those jars, maybe that was consistently this full, all of a sudden gets drained of marbles? Well, we got a breach of trust. Something's happening there. There's something to be paid attention to. Now, of course, this really doesn't involve marbles and how we trust people, but it's an example of how multifaceted trust is. And one jar may get emptied out because of a breach of trust or a lack of follow through, a lack of keeping a commitment or a promise. And some jars, that's not going to be a big deal. We just talk about it, correct it, it's full again. Other jars, if they get empty, it may be a total breach of the relationship. But just because one jar goes down doesn't mean all the rest of them go down. So you see what I'm saying? That our trust level in people is based on a lot of different things. And we can often trust people in some ways more than we can in other ways. And if one area of trust gets breached, it doesn't mean every area of trust gets breached. So these trust jars in a relationship might involve things like a person's predictability of showing up on time. You ever been with somebody in a relationship, they were consistently late to where you just planned on telling them to be ready 20 minutes earlier than you needed to be because you knew they'd be 20 minutes late? I've been in a relationship like that. I came to trust they would always be late, but that didn't mean I couldn't trust other things about them. What people tell you about their past. I've been in relationships where people told me their past was one way, and then later on, I found out that wasn't completely true. Well, that's a whole different area of trust. Another area is if you're in a relationship, how's your partner with members of the opposite sex? Do they tend to like a lot of attention? Are they flirty? Do they have a very loose idea of what keeping their sexual energy within the container of the relationship looks like? How about promises people make? Do they follow through on their promises? How do they handle money? How do they handle conflict? How much do they let you know about their feelings? These are all different areas that, especially the more we get into a relationship with somebody, these are all the variables. And as I said, every one of these jars is going to have a different fullness over time. And a breach of one doesn't necessarily mean a breach in the rest. We can learn to trust a person's nature by knowing what we can trust and what we shouldn't trust about them in these different multifaceted ways. That makes sense? If you know where somebody is likely to not be trustworthy, at least in your terms of defining trustworthy, you can actually trust them more because you know their nature. When I was doing a lot of marriage therapy, people would come in with money problems. And, usually the most controlling around money was the one managing all the finances, and the one loosest around money was always pissed off at the one who was so controlling. And I've heard therapists actually recommend this. It's one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard a therapist recommend. And I've had people cook this one up on their own to try to fix the problem. Is they put the least responsible person when it comes to finances in charge of the money, paying the bills, staying within the budget, not going or spending the credit card. Guess how well that works? That doesn't work. It's stupid. Don't leave the least responsible person with money in the relationship in charge with money. Now, that person may be the best in interacting with the kids. They may be the best in cooking dinner. Trust them with the kids. Trust them with dinner. Don't trust them to manage the money. Don't do that. Don't be stupid. Or how about this one? Don't leave the parent who craves their children's approval the most in charge with disciplining the children. That wouldn't make sense, would it? They're trying to get the kids' approval rather than coming up with effective discipline for the children. So don't trust them with that. Now, trust them that they love their kids, but don't trust them with the discipline. Because if you want somebody's approval, you won't ever discipline them very well. Or don't leave the most distracted driver in charge of driving and trust that they will always get you where you're going without a mishap. If you know somebody that's always on their phone, even while driving, taking calls, checking messages, maybe they have ADHD, they miss turnoffs, the light's red. Don't trust them with the driving and expect that they'll never have an accident or never have close calls or make you a nervous wreck while riding with them. I put a quote last week on both the newsletter and the check-in before the call, a quote from Jesus. And a rough paraphrase, he said, be as cunning as serpents or as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Now, not to give serpents a bad rap or, overly, give doves too much credit. The point he was making is that we can hold and we can be two seemingly opposing things or beliefs or awarenesses at the same time. We can be shrewd and wise and know certain people can't be trusted in certain ways. And we can be as innocent as doves, is that if people are trustworthy, open to them, trust them. Okay? So being trusting and be perceptive at the same time. We're integrating seemingly opposite traits. So be trusting, but don't be naive. Be open, but don't just take everything at face value. So here's a suggestion. If you want to learn what we can trust in people, don't ask, can I trust them? Don't even ask, what can I trust? I mean, it's a good question, but ask instead, what's their nature? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Where are they easily dependable? Where not? What is their agenda? Now, often we assume people's agenda, but in every single interaction, we all have an agenda. I have an agenda on this call. I want to get through it and not mess up. That's my agenda. I want to teach as good a lesson as possible. I want the call to go well. I've got agendas. Every interaction has agendas. We always need to be aware of that. People's behavior is not only dictated by their nature, their strengths, and their weaknesses, but their agenda in any given moment. Now, something else we always need to be asking, what is my attachment to outcome? Because imagine if you sit for a little bit, and actually we're going to probably do some of that on breakout rooms, and think about times where you trusted when you knew you shouldn't have. It was probably because you had an attachment to an outcome. You know something? Research has shown we tend to trust attractive people. You know, if you get in a relationship with a pretty woman, you're going to want to trust her because you don't want to do otherwise, right? So, what is your attachment to an outcome that makes you vulnerable? And also ask that, what are your vulnerabilities? Are you too trusting in general? Are you too untrusting in general? These are things we have to be paying attention to. What's their nature? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What is their agenda? What is my attachment to outcome? What are my vulnerabilities in this context? These are things that increase our ability to make good trust decisions. Okay, I want to tell you a parable. Maybe you've heard this. It's about a scorpion and a frog. The scorpion wants to get across a river but can't swim, so he asks a frog to carry him across. The frog hesitates, afraid that the scorpion might sting it, but the scorpion promises not to, pointing out that it would drown him if he killed the frog in the middle of the river. Oh, okay. He promised, and the logic there. The frog considers this argument. He considers it to be a sensible argument and agrees to transport the scorpion across the river. Midway across the river, you know it, the scorpion stings the frog anyway, dooming them both. The dying frog asks the scorpion why it stung it, despite the consequences, to which the scorpion replies, "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help myself. It's my nature." I can't tell you how many times I've had exes in my life when I confronted them on their behavior, basically said, "I couldn't help myself. It's just the way I am." All right, we need to know how people are to make our decisions of how trustworthy they are. Okay, trust is fluid. That's point number 2. I mentioned about all these different jars as multifaceted, and they go up and down, but once they kind of long-term relationship, they tend to stay pretty static, but yet they can take a dip. So trust isn't either black or white. As I've said, someone can be trustworthy in one area, but untrustworthy in one area, but trustworthy in another. People may be more trustworthy today than they were yesterday. And people change from moment to moment depending on their mood, their context, their feelings. That affects how much we can trust them. So every situation is fluid and requires continuous intuitive sensing into the moment. Most of you are probably familiar with David Data. He wrote a pretty amazing book called The Way of the Superior Man. Well, there's a chapter in there where he says women, he conflates women with the feminine. He's really speaking to the feminine, but he says the feminine never lies. Now, I know we can all raise our hands and say, I've been lied to by plenty of women. Now, we're talking about male, masculine, factual truth telling, how the facts line up, ones and zeros. But David Data says the feminine never lies because in any given moment is speaking the truth of its deepest emotion. Now, that's true of the feminine in us and the feminine in others. Now, that's another one of those things we kind of got to sit with. But it's another way of saying we have to be intuitive and that truth and trustworthiness that can be fluid. Living in the past information is informative, but don't get rigid about it because it's not necessarily an indicator of one's true nature. Now, I've done things in my past that I've gone to work on. And I try not to do anymore. And so I learned from them. Some people do things in their past, but it's the exception to their nature, not the rule about their nature. These are the things we have to pay attention to. Now, it does take time to really get to know a person's nature. I'm reading the five love languages because Dr. Chapman's going to be on the call next week. He says it takes 2 years to get over the infatuation stage of a relationship. I've been saying for a long time, it takes 3 years of conscious dating to truly know somebody. Every woman I've ever been with, if I was with them more than 3 years, at about the 3-year mark, I found out some significant things about them. Either they revealed to me or I just saw them in action that caught me by surprise. 5 years into my marriage with Lupita, after doing ayahuasca, she told me a number of things that were the exact opposite of things she'd told me about her past. And you know what? None of the things she told me surprised me because in many ways they already matched her nature that I'd gotten to know. So when she actually told me the truth, not only did I trust her more, her words lined up with what I already knew to be true about her from interacting with her, and it let me trust her more. So it's fluid and it takes time to get to know people. All right. Trust is intuitive. Now, this is the part that really kind of, for me, was the biggest takeaway in working on these lessons. We can't do these black and whites. Well, people have to earn their trust, or I don't trust anybody, or everybody's unconscious, or everybody's an asshole. It really is an intuitive process. And again, I think we're born knowing what to trust. We're born knowing what our senses tell us, what our body tells us, what our sight tells us, what our smell tells us, what our eyes tell us. But as I've said, because our parents weren't consistent and they actively lied to us, we quit trusting our senses. We quit listening to our truth. So we don't trust our senses anymore. We don't even listen to them anymore. We don't even know what our body's telling us anymore. That is why our unconscious or black and white ways of trusting in most situations don't really serve us. They just kind of perpetuate what we already believe to be true. Most of us have these one size fit every situation trust responses. But knowing who and what we can trust is actually easy if we haven't been taught to repress or mistrust our intuition. I don't know if you guys have animals or been around animals, but animals are really intuitive. Their survival depends on it. They can predict the weather, earthquakes even. Dogs and birds get really antsy before an earthquake happens. They tend to know who's predator and who's prey. They can sense their environment, their body, what's safe to eat, what's not safe to eat. You know, they smell everything. They can smell if that's a good thing to eat or not. They occasionally make a mistake and they regret it, but they're really in tune to their senses. And you know what? I think we are and can be too as well. Let me ask you guys a question. Have you ever eaten something? I don't know, you're at a restaurant, potluck dinner, maybe something been in the fridge a few days, and as you're eating it, just something seemed off about the smell of it. I mean, not bad, just off. The texture of it maybe just didn't seem quite right. Or even the taste was, this doesn't taste like I expected it to. And then somebody says, oh, no, I think it's okay. Seems all right to me. So you go ahead and eat it. And then you get a gut ache. And you knew, you guys have had that experience? We probably all have. We sensed something, but we either didn't trust it or we trusted somebody else more. You ever been around somebody whose breath smelled funny? And we're social animals. We can't just tell somebody, hey man, you got bad breath. Hey man, you got stomach breath. But I'm actually coaching with a guy who's sleeping with multiple women. And he has to make a lot of firm decisions about various judgments in terms of if and when he sleeps with somebody. And I've been instructing him, and he's learned to pay attention if somebody has a breath issue or a foul odor down their issue. It's a sign of somebody who's not fully healthy. Now, it may just mainly that they're stressed and they're having a body reaction, stomach acid thing, but we tune that stuff out. And I've even suggested to my client that he actually tell the women, this is what I sense of you. Are you aware of that? And most of the time they will be. They already know it. And they're probably already stressed about it. But actually, I think it's a more loving thing to tell people when we sense something that we're picking up from them, a vibe, a smell. We can also trust people's facial expressions or body language. Well, maybe their tone of voice doesn't match. They're smiling, but their tone of voice sounds like they're irritated. They're saying, no, everything's fine. Their arms are crossed. Right. We know that. We know that's a lie, right? If a woman even ever says to you, nothing, I'm fine, it's a lie. You can just come to trust that one. Go to the bank on it. So there are things we can pay attention to, and our intuition actually tells us what is trustworthy and what is not if we'll trust it. I'll give you an example. Years ago, this is early in my second marriage. I was pretty poor at that time, and I saved up a bunch of cash. because I wanted a pop-up camping trailer. Now, I couldn't afford a new one or a very good one, and I found a used one. And we went and looked at it, and it was older and it needed some TLC, but they're willing to take $1,000 for it. And it was up, in the pop-up trailer. And so, they put it down. And as we're putting it down, I noticed the mechanism didn't work super well, but we got it down and got it closed. And then I bought it, but I had this uneasy feeling that it didn't work quite right. I thought, well, it's probably fixable. Maybe it's okay. And I got it home, put it up in my driveway, and went to work. I put new carpet in it. I painted it inside, got new cushions for it. I put drapes up, and I was so excited to go camping on a Labor Day weekend, and actually the Memorial Day weekend. And so I went to put the camper down, and I couldn't get it all the way down. The mechanism just would not work. So I kind of had to find some ways to keep the lid down. So we got out camping. It was raining. We're at the ocean, and I couldn't get it all the way up. And then when it was time to get it back down, and so I took it home, and it just sat in my driveway for a couple of years. And I finally sold it to somebody, and I told them everything that was wrong with it. They bought it for a few $100s. But you know what? That was such a great learning experience, because that saved me, I think, thousands of dollars since, that I always pay attention to my intuition in any context. Now, I still get fooled interpersonally because my nature is, I want to believe everybody and think everybody's a good person. That's kind of one of my attachments to outcome that gets in the way. But if we pay attention, our intuition tells us what we need to pay attention to. So every situation where I've trusted somebody who wasn't trustworthy, I saw red and yellow flags that I ignored along the way. My intuition was talking to me. Okay, so how do we get our intuition back? Keep checking all the time in interactions with people. How do you feel in any given situation? Are you anxious? Does something seem out of whack? Does something feel too good to be true? Are you really wanting something to work out in a certain way? Do you get some kind of whiff that something just isn't right? Pause. Listen, pay attention to your body. Maybe bring this up with somebody you trust and ask them, maybe help you with your senses. But overall, trust your senses. When interacting with people, observe their facial expressions, their body language, their tone of voice, their sincerity. Are they pushy? And keep asking yourself, what is their nature? Do you know what their strengths and weaknesses are that determine where they're trustworthy? And ask, what is their agenda? Now, typically, we don't do this like we're hanging out with friends, but it's not a bad thing to keep practicing, even when hanging out with friends. Keep asking, what's your attachment to outcome and what are your vulnerabilities? Yeah, another thing that you can do is decide in what direction you can afford to err. Sometimes you can give too much benefit of the doubt, and that's okay. It's a situation that's not going to bite you on the ass. And there's some situations that probably you should give very little benefit of the doubt because the consequences are too great. Okay, so one last piece. People will ask me, well, how do you learn to trust? A really simple method for learning this process is called a stair-step method. And that is, you're getting to know somebody. Share a little bit, reveal a little bit about you, and check. What do they do with that information? How do they respond to it? Do they seem to understand? What do they do with that information after the fact? Are they reciprocal in the way that they share? That's a big trust factor. You do a lot of sharing, they don't. I don't trust those people. Trust is reciprocal. And then keep sharing more and check. Share more, check. Share more and check. It's a stair-step method. I tell clients, clients used to come in my office and they go, well, I've never done therapy. I don't know where to start. I go, listen, you probably shouldn't trust me 100% right off. And I would teach them stair-step method of even how to learn to trust me, their therapist. So trust yourself, trust your intuition. Be trustworthy yourself, because you're going to project onto other people your own lack of trustworthiness. And then learn what you can trust in others. It's an ongoing, fluid, multifaceted process. And know that you can trust some things about people and other things not so much. And that's okay.